This week on Newsnight, deportations begin from Alligator Alcatraz as the federal government starts sending flights out of the Florida facility. Plus, the state is set to probe Orange County's finances as Governor DeSantis promises more DOJ audits. Newsnight starts now. Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, we're checking back in on the situation at the state's immigration detention facility, known as Alligator Alcatraz.
Alligator Alcatraz, we say never!
Despite protests and legal challenges, Governor DeSantis says deportation flights have begun from the site, which was stood up by the state in just a matter of days using emergency powers. But lawyers report being unable to communicate with their clients who are being held at the facility. Civil rights attorneys allege detainees are being held without charges and denied access to legal counsel while being held at Alligator Alcatraz. But Florida officials say steps have been taken to improve access, including video conferencing with attorneys. The federal judge has set a date of August 18th for civil rights attorneys' request for an injunction against operations at Alligator Alcatraz and the release of agreements between the state and federal governments detailing who has authority over the facility. Environmental groups who say they fear the impacts that Alligator Alcatraz might have on the surrounding Everglades are also suing both the DeSantis and Trump administrations. They allege state and federal environmental laws were not followed in the construction of the facility. Governor DeSantis visited Alligator Alcatraz last week and urged undocumented migrants to voluntarily leave the U.S. He said he expected the number of deportation flights to increase.
We've got these 4 years under the Trump administration to really get the job done. So my hope is that we have a very strong cadence coming out of here. If the cadence is strong and it justifies us going up Northeast Florida and establishing a footprint at Camp Blanding, we will do that.
Meanwhile, polling on Alligator Alcatraz shows strong support among Republicans. 65% view the center positively, while 21% have a negative opinion. 7% say they're unfamiliar with the site. Michael Binder is from UNF's Public Opinion Research Lab.
It's more than 3-to-1 support across Republicans for this whole Alligator Alcatraz concept. There are some interesting variations across age. Whereas older folks, say 55 and plus, are 3/4 supportive of it, 75%. The younger folks tend to be a little less so, right? So the 18 to 34s, they're only at 33%. 35 to 54s are down at 66%. So the younger folks have more concerns about it, more opposed to it, less uncertain about it. More of them haven't heard about it. But again, the key voting demographic for Republicans tend to be older folks. So those are the ones that are particularly supportive.
Michael Binder from the University of North Florida. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining us in the studio this week, managing editor of the community paper here in Orlando, Nick Cholgodio. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Nick. Skylar Swisher, reporter for the Orlando Sentinel. Good to see you as well today, Skylar.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming in. And afternoon anchor at Spectrum News 13, Curtis McLeod. Good to see you, Curtis.
All right, always a pleasure, Steve.
Appreciate you all coming in today. Let me start with you on this one. What do we know about where these flights are going from Alligator Alcatraz?
We only have a few details right now, and that's mainly from Governor Ron DeSantis and other state officials. They spoke last week and talked about 100 of the individuals that were at the facility were deported out of the country. A few hundred others is what they describe as taken to other deportation facilities around the U.S., and that seems to include Florida. The Miami Herald was looking into it, but they don't have recent numbers to really dig into it.
The Sentinels continue to get details on some of those detained in Central Florida, right, that have been sent to Alligator Alcatraz, including some new reporting this week.
Yeah, so we had a story about two brothers from Mexico. The younger brother was pulled over for having overly tinted windows. He was on a valid tourist visa. His older brother was here had overstayed a tourist visa. And both of them ended up in Alligator Alcatraz, and that kind of fits in with some broader reporting that we've done. We took a look at who are the people that are being held on immigration detainers in Lake, Osceola, and Seminole counties.
Yeah.
And what we found is that 55% were picked up on pretty minor traffic violations, a broken tail light, tinted windows. Only about 20% were accused of violent crimes. So in terms of the reporting that we've done so far, we're not seeing that it's necessarily matching up with the administration's rhetoric, essentially, that it's the worst of the worst and it's all violent offenders. I mean, we're finding that there are people who are just being picked up on pretty minor traffic violations, and they're ending up being detained.
And at the same time, there is concern over the legal representation that some of those detainees are getting. There's going to be a court hearing next month, as I mentioned just now, on demands from civil rights attorneys. I mean, what are the complaints? What are they asking for?
Yeah, so the attorneys are saying that they're not able to meet with their clients at the detention facility in the Everglades, that there's no secure video conferencing where they're able to meet with their clients. And also what they're requesting is they want to go to an immigration court and request a bond hearing so that their clients can be released on bond while their immigration case is pending. And what they're finding is that their clients are almost in this kind of legal limbo. Where the courts are saying well, we don't necessarily have jurisdiction over this. So they're seeking essentially due process for the people who are there. Spectrum
News has covered the state's response to these concerns. In fact, you were at Alligator Alcatraz just on Friday. What did we hear from the governor and other officials this week about that?
They're saying, hey, we are taking care of these individuals. There have been calls and complaints saying that about conditions inside the facility from people. They're saying that, hey, this is not the Ritz, but, people are being tended to. They are getting the medical services that they need. They are getting medications. And also when it comes to them getting, visits, the legal representation, the governor said that they were working with the Justice Department on that, and they were trying to make that happen, but they were adding rooms so that they could make those calls, those virtual calls, or have those meetings, in-person meetings with their attorneys should they come down there. They are working on that regard to make that happen. Now, one of the things that I found interesting that the governor said, and I didn't realize it, that he said once you are sent to the so-called Alligator Alcatraz, you are pretty much marked for deportation. There is no turning back here. So it seems to me that, hey, you talk about having due process. If they're already saying that you're marked for deportation once you go there, where does due process fall in there?
Well, of course, some lawyers dispute that. Some say that some of these people at least have valid asylum claims in process, so some might dispute that. Miami-Dade County is sort of asking for more oversight of this site. They demanded more access last week. What are county leaders calling for?
Yeah, so they actually own the property. They still consider themselves the owners of the property. It was originally the Training and Transition Airport.
It's in Collier County, but it's owned by Miami-Dade,
It
correct?
is, yeah. And so it was by executive order of Governor Ron DeSantis that it was taken over for this specific application. They're asking for more oversight because they've heard of the conditions that aren't great. They are also concerned about what happens in the case of a hurricane or other natural disaster. They're also looking about or concerned about the environmental impact. This site was never intended to have this many people live there. Up to thousands of people live there at the same time, plus a number of flights regularly scheduled, if that's the case.
At the same time, the Orange County Commission earlier this month voted to reject a proposal for its corrections officers to transport immigrants on behalf of ICE, an expanded ICE agreement, if you like, on top of that 287G agreement. The Florida Attorney General is threatening the mayor and commissioners with removal now. What do we know about that clash?
So it's definitely heating up. And essentially the Attorney General is saying Orange County needs to support our mission here, and essentially they're threatening to remove the county mayor, the county commissioners. The county mayor is saying, no, this is an unfunded mandate. It's the federal government's responsibility to transport these detainees. And I mean, the war of words is really heated up. I mean, you had the county mayor essentially saying that, who is a former police chief and sheriff, saying, I've been on the streets of Florida longer than you've been alive, to the
Yeah.
Attorney General, who's James Oofmeyer, who's 37 years old.
Yeah, pretty strong words from Mayor Jerry Demings. I mean, I guess the state is saying, what's the state's argument? They're saying that Orange County is therefore a sanctuary jurisdiction if they don't do everything that's necessary to help ICE.
That's the Attorney General's argument, yes, that you need to support the state and the federal government in transporting these detainees.
I mean, there are broader concerns, though, right, throughout the state from some sheriffs who say that they worry about Florida's capacity for holding immigrants on behalf of ICE, under these cooperation agreements. What are we hearing locally? You guys have been covering that.
Yeah, we have, and one of the things that you hear is that it's about capacity, it's about manpower, and also you have a lot of people who, when you take away from resources, it's like, okay, hey, we have other things that people need to get to. We don't have the manpower, we don't have the resources to be so inclined to acquiesce to the request of the state.
Yeah.
So that's what these sheriffs are saying, that if we can somehow have a reserve bank or have more people on the ground to help alleviate the backlog that we already are trying to deal with, let alone trying to now be so inclined to agree with what is being asked of them by the state.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what might happen, as you mentioned before, in the event that a hurricane takes aim at Alligator Alcatraz. The state says the facility is built to withstand a Category 2 storm. Here's Florida Emergency Management Director Kevin Guthrie last week.
Category 3, 4, and 5 is greater than and not equal to a Category 2. When we have that situation, we will have to do an evacuation. And it's incumbent upon the Florida Division of Emergency Management with our law enforcement partners to be able to take care of that. So yes, we're constantly looking at what we can do based on need when we get to a certain level where we're going to go. And I promise you that the hurricane guys have got the hurricane stuff covered. I promise you that.
Kevin Guthrie last week at Alligator Alcatraz. The Sentinel's done some reporting on this issue. What have you guys been learning?
Yeah, so when I started doing these initial stories on Alligator Alcatraz, I got kind of flooded with emails of people wondering, well, what's going to happen in the event of a hurricane? You have this essentially temporary facility with tents in the Everglades. And the response from the state officials is, trust us, we have it, we're pros, we know how to manage hurricanes. But we did file a public records request on July 7th asking for the hurricane plan.
Yeah.
And then Monday of this week, we got a response that there was no responsive records to our request. So I sent an email and asked for clarification. Well, how would you evacuate the facility if there's no written plan? Then they sent us a draft disaster plan that kind of is heavily redacted. But we do know that they have, kind of identified some alternate facilities that they could transport the detainees to. We did some reporting that the emergency management director had kind of toured some facilities in the state that are
He mentioned that himself, yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the public being able to really kind of read through the plan, they're not able to because that information isn't redacted because there's exemptions in the public records law for state emergency plans.
We certainly hope that it doesn't come to that a hurricane does threaten that facility, but certainly something that state officials need to be keeping their eye on. You'll find a link to the latest polling from UNF's Public Opinion Research Lab that we mentioned at the top of the program. It's on our website, wcf.org/newsnight. Okay, next tonight, Florida's DOGE efforts in local governments. The state's Department of Governmental Efficiency Task Force has sent letters to several counties and municipalities notifying them of impending audits. They include Orange County, which is expected to receive a visit from DOGE staff this coming Tuesday and Wednesday. Mayor Demings says the county will fully cooperate, but he says rapid population growth in recent years has strained resources. However, Florida's new CFO, Blazing Golia, says rising property values have pushed tax bills higher and that local government budgets have far exceeded inflation or population needs. He says cities and counties should cut property tax rates to give relief to homeowners.
Over the last 5 years, a lot of local governments, their budgets have gone up anywhere between 80 to 120%. They've basically doubled. And you have to ask yourself, are the taxpayers getting the most bang for their buck? are local governments actually spending frugally, fiscally, as if it was their money? Now, the sad state of affairs is that most governments, most elected officials, they view it as not their money. We need to remind them that it's your money. It's not theirs. So governments really should not be increasing their budgets more than population growth and inflation growth. Anything over and above that should be looked at. And that is the effort of these audits. That is the efforts of Florida DOGE. That is what we're trying to do. We're trying to shine a light on excessive, wasteful spending.
Florida CFO Blaise Ingoglia there. Skyler, before we get to the DOGE work, just give us some background on Blaise Ingoglia, who I think you've written about. He's a key ally, right, of Governor DeSantis. What should people know about him?
Yeah, Blaise Ingoglia, he's very close to the governor. He was a state senator, and he really cut his teeth in politics in terms of going after what he thinks is wasteful spending in local government. And his kind of remarks when he was appointed to this post of CFO is that he's going to be very aggressive when it comes to auditing local government. Property taxes is an important issue for him. He feels like they need to be essentially eliminated for homesteaded properties.
Very much on the same page as the governor.
Very much on the same page as the governor, yes.
Yeah. On the DOGE efforts, Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings received a letter last week. Nick, what does the DOGE task force say about the county's finances and what's it asking for?
Yeah, so as he mentioned there in the spot we just ran, he thinks that there's more money coming in, and there is, from property taxes, but it's because of the values going up. It's not necessarily because property tax rates have gone up.
They've remained the same in Orange County.
In many places, they've remained the same. Because of the increase in value, they haven't had to increase it. So he's looking at different ways that to audit that process. And what he's looking at for Orange County specifically is things like transportation, any kind of renewable energy, DEI, and staff salaries.
What's been the response, I guess, from Orange County officials?
Well, the response from Orange County officials is we've seen a tremendous amount of growth over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So, that requires more spending. I mean, there's more calls of service to the sheriff's office. And also, you've had inflation, you have rising costs that they have to absorb as well.
How are other local governments responding to these state audit demands, but beyond Orange County? Is that similar to the response you're seeing elsewhere?
Yeah, so it's kind of, most are saying, bring it on. We'll open our books because we have confidence in our books and their budget sheets, and saying, hey, we will open them up for you to inspect, for you to look, and in compliance with what this Florida DOGE effort is looking to do.
What about the core of these DOGE claims? The governor and his team say local government's budgets have ballooned, as we mentioned, skyrocketing property tax revenues. The Sentinel's actually looked at the finances in Orange County. Does the criticism from the state seem accurate?
In terms of them taking in more revenue, it does appear to be accurate. But what's happening is they're not necessarily raising the tax rate. They're keeping the tax rate the same. But because those property values are going up, they're collecting more revenue. So the taxpayers are paying more. And under state law, that is a tax increase. I think it's important to note, though, there is some context that needs to be added, which is, you've seen the growth, you've seen inflation, you've seen the cost for local government increase. Another point they make is oftentimes we're getting unfunded mandates, such as having to transport detainees to a detention facility, 200 plus miles away from Orange County.
Which is a cost to the county, yeah, for sure. Task force says there's a $330 million increase in property tax takings in Orange County. Nick, some counties and municipalities in Central Florida actually say that they want to increase millage rates. Many of them are keeping it the same. What are those counties saying, counties and municipalities saying about their reasoning for doing that? Is this just about the strain on services?
To a certain extent, yeah. So staff salaries also going up. So for example, in Seminole County, hasn't increased their millage rate in about 16 years, is behind the 8 ball when it comes to stuff like the sheriff's office. They want to spend or need to spend $16.2 million more than they did last year. One of the reasons the sheriff's office says that is because they can't keep up with starting salaries. for their rookie deputies. Deputies, potential employees are going to other places in Florida because they can't afford to hire them there.
I mean, this issue of property taxes has been a hot one, especially in the last legislative session. We've heard from the governor talking about how he wants to eliminate property taxes before the end of his term. This is going to be pretty important, isn't it, as an issue, particularly as we head into the next election?
Yes, it will, with the governor wanting to make sure it is an amendment on the ballot and basically saying, let's take it to the voters here. Let's let them decide. You know, he tried to do what he did with the balance in the budget and making sure it would try to get in there.
He wanted property tax relief right in the
last
budget,
but
didn't get it.
But didn't get it. It didn't happen. And, you know, we know about that squabble with the budget and everything. But now he's saying, let's just go directly to the people and let them decide and see what they can come up with. And
it's worth noting, right, that Ingoglia could face a challenge for CFO at the election from fellow Republican Senator Joe Gruders. He's a DeSantis foe, but a Trump ally. In fact, the president's endorsed Gruders, right, for RNC chair. Could that get politically tricky for the governor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this definitely has kind of set off some political intrigue because, I mean, Trump endorsed Senator Joe Gruders for the position of CFO. And instead of naming Gruders to that post, DeSantis, appointed his ally, Senator Blaise Ingoglia. And he even said, when asked about it, if George Washington rose from the dead and tapped him on the shoulder and said, you need to appoint Joe Gruders to CFO, that he still wouldn't do it, because he just feels like he would be betraying the voters who supported him to lead the state in a conservative direction. And so after that happened, Trump endorsed Gruders to be the chair of the RNC. And, from some reporting that CNN did, this totally, caught the governor and his political inner circle kind of off guard. And it's not necessarily a situation you want to have if you're thinking about running for president and a potential political foe or enemy is in that position as RNC chair.
As always, there's political intrigue when it comes to dealings between the state and the White House. Be sure to find us on social media. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us on X at Newsnight WCF. Okay, finally tonight, Orlando is getting closer to having a permanent Pulse Memorial. The city is in contract negotiations with Gomez Construction to design and build a memorial based on a conceptual design from the Pulse Memorial Advisory Committee. The city is also purchasing the property immediately behind the Pulse site, which will also be used for the memorial.
These two steps are significant as we move toward the construction of that permanent memorial. Of course, that was one of the darkest days in the history of our community, but as always, Orlando has responded with love and compassion and unity, and today we take two more steps in recognizing what happened that day.
Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. Nick, let me start with you because you've covered a lot of these machinations on Pulse. What do we know about that company that's negotiating with the city for the Pulse Memorial construction?
Yeah, it was shortlisted. There were 3 Florida companies that were shortlisted, and Gomez was ultimately picked by an advisory board. They've been in Florida for around 50 years. They started in Miami, but they opened their Winter Park office in 1991. So they've been in and around Orlando for quite a long time, and they've done work on the Orlando International Airport, high rises here and in Miami, and other facilities.
So this was a process where they would put in a bid along with other companies?
Correct. They put out a call for an RFP after the Pulse Advisory Committee came up with some initial designs. So those might change in terms of now that we have a budget and we know approximately the space that the memorial is going to go into, but they have an outline of what it should look like.
So what happens now with the sequence of events, I guess, going forward? When can people expect to see construction start taking place?
Well, construction is expected to start sometime next year, and of course there are some things they have to talk through here and get to. Designs may change, development processes may change, but now it's just about getting those permits that they need to go forward. There's still the talk of what pieces of we know it's going to be the old club likely demolished. So all of that has to take place.
Sure.
But we do know construction is expected to start in 2026 with the building, the memorial, being ready by 2027.
Sort of towards the end of 2027.
Towards
Or
the
I
end,
think
yeah.
the mayor has said he'd like to see that.
Yeah, he said he'd like to.
sooner.
Yeah, definitely. They want to have it a lot sooner. So sure, a lot of people would say they would love to have this thing ready for the 10th anniversary or marking 10 years since the tragedy happened. But that's just not likely, as they'll just be starting construction.
It's been a long road. The city also agreed, as I mentioned, to purchase that land adjacent to Pulse from a GOP donor for $1 million. So that land can also be included in the memorial. But that's a controversial move there. What's the criticism?
Yeah, so the criticism there is the city agreed to purchase this land for $1 million. And what happened was Craig Matera, kind of a local businessman who's very politically plugged in, purchased the land and kind of held it as a placeholder. He didn't sell it for more than what he purchased it for to the city. But the criticism, and this has kind of been going on for some time, is that the city is overpaying for the property. They're spending $1 million on this adjacent property. I believe they spent about $2 million on the club itself. So that's kind of been the criticism that the city's been facing.
Before we wrap this up, Nick, just walk us through that design that the city and Gomez Construction are talking about for the Pulse Memorial. The Pulse Memorial Advisory Committee came up with that?
Yeah, so earlier this year, they finally came up with a design for it that everyone agreed on.
Yeah.
They talked through with many of the survivors, the families of the deceased, what it would take to create this. And they all came back with sort of these pieces and parts they wanted to see in it. And a local group came up with and volunteered to create the renderings as you've seen them now online. So there is a memorial pool where the dance floor used to be. There's a survivor wall as well. The place honoring not only the deceased but the survivors too. And then, conceptually, there's an area of the wall that's going to be kept, whether that's a conceptual piece or it's a literal piece of the wall where survivors were taken out and evacuated. So that was a big piece that they wanted to keep somehow in the design as well.
Well, as I mentioned, it's been a long road. A lot of people will be looking forward to seeing what the final memorial looks like. A reminder, you can find much more Newsnight content on our website, including every episode of the program. It's all at wcf.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Nick Cioccodio from the community paper, Skylar Swisher from the Orlando Sentinel, Curtis McLeod from Spectrum News 13. Thanks so much for coming in, guys. Really appreciate your time today. Good to see you. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.